My name is Veronica, I'm 39, and I'm a creature of spreadsheets and forecasts. My world is one of numbers, of calculated risks and predictable outcomes. It's a world I built for myself, brick by meticulous brick, far away from the chaotic emotional landscape of my childhood. But on that chilly November evening, I was trying to bridge those two worlds. I wanted, just for one night, for my family to see the world I'd built and maybe, just maybe, feel proud of me for it. The air in our Charlotte home was thick with the scent of rosemary roasted turkey and melting butter. Soft jazz whispered from the speakers, a stark contrast to the frantic symphony that had been playing in my head all day. My husband, Julian, caught my eye from across the dining room, where he was adjusting the centerpiece of autumn flowers. He gave me a slow, reassuring smile that spoke volumes. It said, "Everything is perfect. Breathe." He was right. The table was set with our best china, the one we only use for special occasions. The candles flickered, casting a warm, golden glow on the polished wood. This was more than a dinner. It was a stage, and I had been planning the performance for weeks. The occasion was my promotion to vice president at the investment bank where I'd worked for the last 15 years. It was a title I had bled for, earned through countless 60-hour weeks, missed social events, and a level of dedication that often bordered on obsession. I didn't just want to tell them, I wanted to show them. I wanted them to sit in my beautiful home, eat the expensive food I could now afford, and understand that their daughter, the quiet, bookish one they never quite knew what to do with, had made something of herself. Our son, Noah, who at 14 was all lanky limbs and quiet observation, carefully placed the last of the linen napkins beside each plate. He had my eyes but Julian's calm demeanor. He looked at the table, then at me, and gave a small nod of approval. In his own way, he understood how much this night meant. The doorbell rang, and a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Showtime. My parents, Gregory and Brenda, were the first to arrive, followed closely by my older brother, Dylan. The hugs were brief, almost perfunctory. My mother, Brenda, gave the living room a sweeping, critical glance. "You've redecorated again, Veronica. Must be nice." It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment, a subtle jab that landed exactly where she intended. My father, Gregory, clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Place is looking good, Ronnie. The market must be treating you well." He was a man who spoke in headlines, his emotions always buried under a veneer of gruff nonchalance. He'd tried his hand at a small business decades ago and failed spectacularly. Ever since, my success in the financial world felt less like a source of pride for him and more like a quiet, constant reproach. Then there was Dylan. He sauntered in, already scrolling on his phone, and gave me a one-armed hug without looking up. "Smells good, sis. Hope you made enough for leftovers." Dylan had a charm that worked on everyone but those who knew him best. He drifted through life on a cloud of vague promises and half-finished projects, always with a hand out, always with a story about how close he was to his big break. Julian greeted them all with a warmth I couldn't quite muster, taking their coats, offering them drinks. He was the buffer, the diplomat, the one who smoothed the jagged edges of my family. As I watched them settle into my living room, my perfect stage began to feel a little less sturdy, a little more like a set that could collapse at any moment. As I poured my mother a glass of Chardonnay, I caught my reflection in the glass-fronted cabinet behind the bar. I saw the hopeful smile plastered on my face and, for a moment, I let myself believe. I thought about the other secret I was holding, the one that was, in my mind, even bigger than the promotion. It was a secret I'd been cherishing for weeks, a grand gesture I was certain would finally, unequivocally, melt their reserve and prove my love. The memory was so vivid it felt like I was living it all over again. It was 3 weeks prior, a quiet Tuesday night. Julian and Noah were asleep, and the house was wrapped in a comfortable silence. I was in my home office, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen and the soft lamp on my desk. A half-empty glass of Cabernet sat beside me, a small reward after a long day. This was my sanctuary, the place where I made the decisions that shaped our lives. And that night, I was making a big one. On the screen was the website for a luxury cruise line. Gleaming white ships sailed across turquoise waters, and smiling, silver-haired couples clinked champagne glasses on private balconies. It was their 40th wedding anniversary next spring, and my father's official retirement was just a few months away. For years, I'd listened to their wistful sighs about travel. "Oh, to go to the Caribbean," my mother would say, flipping through a magazine. "Maybe one day, when we win the lottery," my father would add with a dry chuckle. They never asked for anything, not directly, but the unspoken wants hung in the air between us, a constant, low-humming frequency of disappointment. I wanted to give them that lottery win. I spent over an hour comparing itineraries, scrutinizing deck plans, and reading reviews. I wasn't looking for a bargain, I was looking for a dream. I found it in the Grand Caribbean Voyager package. 10 days. 5 islands. A stateroom with a private balcony, all-inclusive drinks, fine dining, even shore excursion credits. It was the kind of trip they would never book for themselves, a level of luxury they only saw in movies. I imagined my mother's face, her initial disbelief melting into tears of joy. I pictured my father, a man who rarely showed emotion, rendered speechless, a genuine, unforced smile finally reaching his eyes. I imagined them sending me photos, tanned and relaxed, from a beach in Barbados. The price tag at the bottom of the screen read $24,850. For a fleeting second, the pragmatic financier in me did the math. But the daughter in me, the one who still desperately craved their approval, pushed that voice aside. This wasn't an expense, it was an investment. An investment in a memory, in a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness that I could give them. I took a sip of my wine, the rich liquid fortifying my resolve. I clicked confirm booking and entered my credit card details. The confirmation email arrived moments later. It was done. It was my secret. My ace in the hole. Snapping back to the present, I handed my mother her wine, the secret warming me from the inside out. This was the night. I would announce my promotion, a testament to my hard work. And then, for the grand finale, I would give them the world. Tonight, I thought, they would finally see me. They would finally be proud. We moved to the dining table, and the illusion of a perfect family dinner began to fray at the edges almost immediately. The conversation was a minefield of passive aggression and unspoken resentments. Brenda, my mother, poked at her green bean casserole. "It's good, Veronica, but it's not like the one my mother used to make." She used fresh mushrooms, not the canned kind. I had, in fact, used fresh cremini mushrooms, which I'd spent 20 minutes cleaning and slicing. I just smiled and said, "I'm glad you like it." My father, Gregory, steered every topic back to his own anxieties. When Julian mentioned a recent political development, my father just shook his head. "It's all going to hell. The market's a bubble, the government's a mess. I'm telling you, the whole system's rigged." It was his standard refrain, a blanket of pessimism he threw over everything. When I tried to share a light-hearted story about a recent success at work, a complex deal I'd helped close, his eyes glazed over. "That's nice, Ronnie," he mumbled, before turning to my brother. "Dylan, did you ever get that noise in your engine checked out?" Dylan, naturally, reveled in the attention. He launched into a long, rambling story about a mechanic who tried to rip him off, portraying himself as the savvy, street-smart hero. He had this way of making his perpetual state of near failure sound like a noble struggle against a corrupt world. All the while, he was texting under the table. Every few minutes, his lips would curl into a smirk at something on his screen. He was physically present, but his attention, his respect, was a million miles away. I felt like I was fading into the wallpaper of my own home. I was the host, the chef, the financier of the entire evening, yet I was being treated like a ghost at the feast. I tried again, directing a question to my mother about her garden club. She gave a one-word answer before turning to Dylan. "Dylan, honey, did you remember to call your cousin about that job lead?" The message was clear. Dylan's life, with all its minor dramas and lack of progress, was infinitely more interesting than mine. Julian, bless his heart, tried to run interference. He'd ask me direct questions, trying to draw me back into the center of the conversation. Tell your dad about that charity gala you helped organize. They raised a ton of money, didn't they? I'd start to explain, only to have my father interrupt with a comment about how charities were all scams anyway. It was exhausting. It felt like trying to swim against a current that was determined to pull me under. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach, extinguishing the warm hope I'd felt just an hour before. I looked across the table at their faces, my mother's pursed lips, my father's weary cynicism, my brother's smug indifference, and realized that maybe it didn't matter what I served them, or what news I had to share. To them, I was already cast in a role, and it seemed nothing I did would ever change the script. The main course plates were cleared, and I brought out the dessert, a pumpkin cheesecake I had spent the entire previous afternoon perfecting. As I sliced into its creamy richness, I decided this was the moment. The atmosphere couldn't get any worse, and maybe, just maybe, my news could still salvage the night. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to launch into the speech I had mentally rehearsed a dozen times. But Dylan beat me to it. He pushed his chair back with a loud scrape, the sound jarring in the tense quiet. He stood, raising his wine glass. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He didn't look at the room, he looked directly at me, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying an oily confidence. The table fell silent. Even my father looked up from his plate, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Dylan let the silence hang for a moment, savoring his command of the room. "To my dear sister, Veronica." He paused for dramatic effect. "Mom and Dad were talking to me the other day. Just chatting, you know." He swirled the wine in his glass. "And something came up. They think you're the most selfish person alive." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the insult itself, it was the delivery, the casual cruelty, the public performance of it. My breath hitched in my chest. I looked at my parents, expecting, praying for, a denial, a scolding, anything. But there was nothing. My mother, Brenda, took a delicate sip of her wine and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of agreement. My father, Gregory, stared down at his fork, his silence a deafening confirmation. A few of my other relatives at the end of the table chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke, but they followed my parents' lead. They nodded along. They approved. Time seemed to slow down. The soft jazz from the speakers became a discordant noise. The flickering candlelight seemed to mock me. Selfish? Me? The woman who had spent the last 2 decades striving, sacrificing, planning, all with the background hope that her success could one day lift them all up. The woman who, just 3 weeks ago, had spent a small fortune on a dream vacation for the very people nodding in agreement with her character assassination. The initial shock was a white-hot flash of pain. It felt like a betrayal so profound it hollowed me out, leaving nothing but a ringing emptiness. But then, something else rose up from that void. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years, pure, undiluted rage. It was cold, sharp, and clarifying. It burned away all the hope, all the anxiety, all the desperate need for their approval. In that instant, a lifetime of small slights, of being overlooked and undervalued, coalesced into a single, hard diamond of resolve in my chest. I placed my dessert fork down on my plate with a soft click. I looked up, meeting Dylan's smug gaze. I let my lips curve into a smile. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a CEO about to liquidate a failing asset. Is that so? I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the silence. What a coincidence. I let the words hang in the air for a beat. Then I guess their $25,000 dream retirement cruise I just paid for is cancelled. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room. My father choked on his wine, a violent, sputtering cough that turned his face a blotchy red. My mother's fork clattered from her hand onto her plate, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. Her face, which had been set in a mask of smug agreement, drained of all color, leaving behind a pasty, shocked pallor. Dylan's grin vanished as if it had been wiped clean off his face. His mouth hung slightly open. The nodding relatives froze, their eyes darting between me and my parents, the full weight of my words finally crashing down upon them. I held their gazes, one by one. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. The numbers, my native language, had spoken for me, and they had said everything. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Every comment helps the story reach more people. Thank you so much. The rest of the dinner was a silent, agonizing affair. No one touched their cheesecake. My family left shortly after, a scattered mess of mumbled goodbyes and averted eyes. As soon as the door closed behind them, Julian wrapped his arms around me. I didn't cry. I felt strangely numb, hollowed out, as if I had just survived a major emotional car crash. The numbness, however, began to wear off over the next 3 days, replaced by a slow-burning anger. It started with a text from my mother. It wasn't a single message, but a barrage, a series of text bubbles that painted a masterpiece of manipulation. Veronica, I can't sleep. What you said has deeply hurt your father and me. It was just a misunderstanding. Dylan has a clumsy way of putting things. You can't be serious about the cruise. Your father has already been looking at maps of the islands. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. With such cruelty over a little joke. There was no apology. Not a single word acknowledging the public humiliation. It was all about their hurt feelings, their dashed expectations. It was a masterclass in guilt-tripping, and for the first time in my life, I was immune. I read the messages, my thumb hovering over the reply button, and then I simply put the phone down. There was nothing to say. Instead, I picked up the phone and made a different call. The next morning, during a break between meetings, I walked to a quiet conference room and dialed the number for the cruise line. A cheerful agent named Maria answered. I explained, in a calm, businesslike tone, that I needed to cancel a booking. I gave her the confirmation number. Oh, the Grand Caribbean Voyager. That's our premium package, she chirped. May I ask the reason for the cancellation, ma'am? Perhaps we can find you a different date. I paused, looking out the window at the Charlotte skyline. The circumstances of the recipients have changed, I said, the words tasting like cold, hard freedom. It is no longer a viable gift. There was a fee, of course. A significant one. I lost a few $1,000s in non-refundable deposits. But as Maria processed the cancellation and told me the remaining sum would be credited back to my account, I didn't feel a sting of financial loss. I felt a profound sense of relief. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, a heavy, ornate door I had been holding open for far too long. With every click of her keyboard, I felt lighter. The credit alert on my phone was a confirmation. It was done. But the battle, I soon learned, was just beginning. The phone calls started that evening. First, an aunt from my mother's side. Veronica, honey, I heard there was some trouble. Your mother is just devastated. Then, a cousin. Hey, V, Heard you flashed some big trip in front of your folks and then snatched it away. Kinda harsh, don't you think? The narrative was being written, and I was being cast as the villain. The story they were spinning was simple and effective. Their wealthy, successful daughter had lorded her money over them, only to cruelly revoke her generosity at the slightest provocation. There was no mention of the insult, no context, just a picture of a cold, materialistic daughter and her poor, heartbroken parents. The manipulation wasn't just for me anymore, it was being weaponized and deployed to the entire family network. The next escalation came not from a phone call, but in person. Dylan showed up, unannounced, at Julian's accounting firm downtown. Julian's office is a small, professional space, a calm oasis of order. Dylan's presence was like a bull in a china shop. He bypassed the receptionist and walked straight into Julian's office, closing the door behind him. Julian called me the second Dylan left, his voice tight with controlled anger. He didn't come here to talk, Julian told me. He came here to deliver a message. Apparently, Dylan had leaned on Julian's desk and, in a low voice, told him that he needed to get his wife under control. He said I was being hysterical, that I was tearing the family apart over nothing, and that my new money had made me arrogant. He suggested that Julian, as the man of the house, should talk some sense into me and convince me to apologize and rebook the cruise. Julian, to his infinite credit, didn't engage. He simply stood up and told Dylan that their meeting was over and that he was no longer welcome in his office. He said that he supported his wife 100%, and that if Dylan had a problem with me, he had a problem with him, too. Dylan, unaccustomed to such a firm, unmovable boundary, apparently sputtered for a moment before storming out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. Hearing this filled me with a fresh wave of fury. The audacity of him, to go behind my back and try to leverage my own husband against me. It was a tactic straight from the manipulator's playbook, an attempt to isolate me and undermine my support system. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was my Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister. She was always the quietest of the siblings, a gentle soul who usually stayed on the periphery of the family drama. "Veronica," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "I need to tell you something. I shouldn't have kept quiet this long, and I'm sorry." She proceeded to tell me that a few months ago, she'd been talking to Dylan. She had mentioned that she was worried about my parents' finances in retirement. And Dylan had laughed. He'd told her not to worry. He said, and Carol quoted him directly, "Veronica takes care of them. She's always slipping them money for stuff. Paid for the new roof last year, fixed their car last month. It's great. It means I don't have to." The phone felt slick in my hand. It wasn't just that Dylan knew I helped them. It was his attitude. The smug relief. The casual admission that he was happy to let me carry the entire burden so he didn't have to. He hadn't just been ignorant, he had been a willing and grateful participant in my silent sacrifice. His outrage now, his accusations of selfishness, weren't born of principle. They were born of panic. The family ATM was closing its account, and he was terrified. "He knew, Veronica," Carol said softly. "And he let you take the fall for it all at that dinner. It was wrong." "Thank you for telling me, Carol," I whispered, my voice thick. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then, I opened my phone, went to Dylan's contact, and pressed block. A small, digital act that felt as momentous as signing a Declaration of Independence. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more toxic, it found a new way to devolve. Aunt Carol called me again a week later, her voice heavy with reluctance. "I think you need to know," she started. "Brenda and Gregory are posting on Facebook." My heart sank. I wasn't on Facebook much, but I knew the kind of vague, passive-aggressive posts she was talking about. She described them to me. There were no names, of course. Just cryptic statuses about how some children forget where they came from when they get a little money. Posts about how sad it is when a daughter chooses her husband's influence over her own blood. A shared article titled, "Spotting the Signs of a Narcissistic Spouse." They were painting Julian as the villainous puppet master, and me as his brainwashed victim. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to control the narrative and rally public sympathy to their side. That was it. That was the final, definitive line. Attacking me was one thing. Slandering my husband, the kindest, most supportive man I had ever known, was an act of war I would not tolerate. The hurt I'd been nursing for weeks solidified into something hard and cold. It was no longer about anger or betrayal. It was about protection. I calmly went to my phone and blocked Gregory and Brenda's numbers. I went onto the social media app and blocked their profiles without looking at them. I was methodically, digitally, excising them from my life. Each block was a snip of a cord, a severing of a toxic tie. There was no rage, just a profound, weary certainty. I was done. The next morning, I called my lawyer. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had handled our estate planning. I explained the situation to her in the same calm, measured tone I had used with the cruise line agent. I wasn't looking to sue. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for a fortress. I want to protect my family, I told her, and when I said my family, I meant Julian and Noah. I want to ensure that my assets are secure and that there is no legal avenue for them to claim any entitlement to my money or our property in the future. And I want to formally cease all contact. She understood immediately. We spent an hour on the phone discussing options. We restructured the trust for Noah's college education, making it ironclad. We reviewed my will and estate documents. And finally, she drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was a simple, powerful document. It stated, in unambiguous legal terms, that any further attempts by Gregory, Brenda, or Dylan to contact me, my husband, or my son, directly or indirectly, or to defame our characters publicly or privately, would be met with legal action. She sent it via registered mail that afternoon. The act felt final. It wasn't a petty act of revenge. It was the sober, necessary act of a person drawing a boundary to protect herself and her loved ones from further harm. It was the end of a chapter. The months that followed were quiet. The silence from my side of the family was total. The letter, it seemed, had worked. Through the grapevine of Aunt Carol, who still called occasionally to check in, I heard snippets of the aftermath. My parents, who had apparently been banking on the cruise money and my continued financial support for their retirement plans, had to sell the house I grew up in. They downsized to a small, two-bedroom condo in a retirement community an hour away. Carol said they were bitter, constantly complaining about their circumstances, always finding someone new to blame. Dylan, without the family home as a home base and without the implicit safety net of his successful sister, had to get a second job bartending on weekends to make his rent. The grand business plans had evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of bills and responsibilities. I never felt a shred of triumph hearing this news. There was no, "I told you so" moment. There was just a deep, lingering sadness for the family we could have been, for the love that had been poisoned by jealousy and entitlement. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. And I was living with mine. My consequences were peace. My home was no longer a stage for a performance, but a sanctuary. Weekends were filled with Noah's soccer games, hiking trips with Julian, and quiet evenings spent reading without a knot of dread in my stomach about an impending family obligation. The money I had been pouring into a bottomless pit of ingratitude was now going into a travel fund for the three of us. We were planning a trip to Italy for the next summer, a real one, born of joy, not obligation. One evening, the three of us were curled up on the couch, watching a movie. It was a silly comedy, and we were all laughing. Noah, in a rare moment of teenage affection, rested his head on my shoulder. Julian's hand was warm on my knee. I looked at their faces, illuminated by the flickering light of the screen, and my heart felt so full it ached. This was my family. The one I had chosen, and the one that had chosen me back. The one that didn't measure love in dollars and cents, but in laughter, support, and quiet moments on a couch. I cut them off completely. I saved my own family, my own peace. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder. Am I the asshole for letting them lose everything? What do you think? Was Veronica right to draw the line so harshly? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content just like this.